One, we should be live. Guessing I'm waiting for here. There comes the confirmation. Hello, everyone. I am here with John Ross, and he's from Warzone Atlanta, the event that just took place a few weeks back. Um, and he was the TO and also the event organizer. I guess you were like the main guy for that. It was a rather big event, and it had both 40K and bolt action as well, although of course in a smaller scale for bolt action. But we saw some of the tables, and I've already done a video about the meta for this event. So it's really nice to talk to John about how it all went. So,
Um, yeah, I'm
John,
excited to be here.
John, will you want to start? What do you think about the event from an organizer's perspective? How do you think it all went?
So it's almost 200 people show up for the event. Like you say, 40K is the big part, and we've been doing that for 6, 7 years. And there's a whole team there. There's 4 people that make all of that work, and they do the bulk of that work, not me. So this year I ran the Bolt Action tournament as our second system.
Yep.
And maybe in the future we'll add Age of Sigmar and some other things too. But right now this was our first attempt to branch out to a second system. So it's a grand tournament for 40K. Um, and then we added Bolt Action on. So I kind of managed that whole thing both as an experiment at adding a different system and because I'm kind of bored with 40K and I wanted
Okay.
to I wanted to do something with Bolt Action.
You wanted to branch out. Yeah. Yeah. How long have you been playing bolt action for yourself?
Since version 1,
Yep.
on and off, my group are a little bit magpies. They jump system to system to system, so they'll roll into and out of it. Actually, we'll talk about this when we start talking about order dice counts and the rest of it, and my
Yeah.
theory
Yeah.
about why U.S. lists look different than the others. But
Yeah.
the tournament scene is the way I've been able to keep the hobby going for me as I end up traveling and going to tournaments,
Yeah.
even if the local clubs are moved on to to
To other
game du
stuff.
jour.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So in Atlanta, I don't know what's how far will people travel, actually travel to go to an event like this. I got a message from some guys who said they had driven 6.5 hours to go to Warzone Atlanta. But what was
That's
your
right.
experience?
Yeah, so our farthest travel players were from Maine. We had a player from Maine. We had
Well, that's pretty
someone.
far.
We had Indianapolis, Kentucky. We had North Carolina. I think we may have had someone from Florida. I don't remember. I had someone from Connecticut. Flew all the way from Connecticut.
Oh,
So you're talking
yeah,
1,200 plus miles.
yeah.
You could get from your hometown to Paris and back probably for about that
Definitely,
distance.
definitely, yeah,
Right. And we had unfortunately the flu has been raging here in the U.S. So we had a bunch of paid players that ended up not being able to come,
oh, that sucks, yeah,
which is going to usual. But we would have even had some people from New Orleans and some other places. I think you'll see that in U.S. tournaments. That even though it's a big country with big, very large cities, Atlanta's a 6 million population
yeah,
city.
yeah,
The country's so spread out that you end up, the distances people have to travel for the competitive scene get
yeah,
longer and longer.
yeah, they do. And there's the thing with you Americans that you tend to view distance differently from Europeans. I find, and I've been to the States. Um, People in America are willing to travel for a lot longer just for a social get together or whatever, than we Europeans, maybe especially Danes, because we're a very small country. We're basically the size of Atlanta. That's the population of Denmark, right? So, yeah, right, okay.
It,
And how many players did you end up having?
I think we had 17, 16. We had 16 that ended up showing up and playing.
Yeah,
Um, and I had 21 plus a ringer planned. And that was about as much space as I could have handled in the room that I probably could have gone to 24, but the tables, I don't know if you got a chance to see those. They
well,
are
I had a
from.
chance to see them, but I haven't shown anything to anyone. Do you
Ooh,
have any pictures we can see actually?
I
Because
can
they were
do that.
really nice.
I can do that. I'm
Um,
glad. I'm so proud to hear you say that. We
it's one of the things that I always look for when I'm looking for events that are good, right? Um, you want to see tables that are beautiful. Of course, if you're going to very competitive tournaments, you want to see tables that are playable. but more than that, because other hobbies have sort of moved on. I mean, Age of Sigmar, 40K a bit has moved on from very elaborate, very beautiful terrain. Bolt Action has not. So just looking at your tables, where oh yeah, look at these. Yeah,
Um, the 40K room, if you walked over to the grand tournament, it looked like we call it speedball. I don't know if you
yeah,
guys play paintball in Europe. You know, speedball, which are these kind of artificial or abstract
yeah,
barriers
yeah,
versus a tactical thing running around in the woods. You know, trying to
exactly.
replicate it. It's all become abstract. You know, the maps don't matter. It's user placed terrain. Every building looks exactly the same. This is very different. So
It is.
we set a time and a location. So there was the Bardia or Tobruk or
Yep,
a small town in Sicily or whatever. We set a location that's the Imperial Gardens down there on the right. So we had a couple of tables that were actually alternate history, including
yeah.
one in the U.S. We had Sleepy Hollow, North New
Ooh,
York,
okay.
imagining perhaps a alternate history invasion. But we set
Yeah,
the theme for the table, and all the terrain and the mats and everything was designed to match. So that if you brought beautifully painted miniatures that you spent a lot of energy making look realistic and look really cool, you brought them, the
and you
quality of your
played on
miniatures
something that
wouldn't
was
be
immersive.
diminished
Yeah,
by a terrible table.
yeah. How do you guys source your tables? In Denmark, it's very usual for the players actually to bring their own tables and then have a best table competition as well. How do you source tables in the US?
So in this instance, there were two of us that were kind of the main organizers. He brought one table.
Yeah.
All the rest of them you saw were all mine. That is not usual. So my wife has a very large SUV, and I was able to in 2 trips. I was able to get all these totes packed into it. But it's kind of cool. So every tote has the mat. It has all the terrain. Has a card that describes the unique features. So like
Yeah,
how do you play those temples there in the Japanese
yeah,
farmland or whatever, or the rice paddies, and a plexiglass holder with terrain rules on the back of it. So it's very simple. It's designed so that a experienced player can walk up to the table. You shouldn't have to negotiate. How do you
nope.
play a wheat field? How do you play a hill? And you should be able to get playing very quickly.
Mm.
The density of these tables were probably caught a lot of players by surprise. So I think a lot of players are used to 2 hills and a couple of fields, and then that's it.
Well, if
These
you're
some
used to 40K style terrain, or maybe even the WTC, then you'll find very sparse tables. They're very bare, but these have a very nice density. Not overly so. I have seen denser tables in some tournaments, but these are where I think they should be because they're still open enough that you can move around them, but you have a lot of cover so that you can sort of like snake your way forward. That's what I always want to do. Be able to sneak my infantry up.
There was an extreme, Bo. So I had a full city table, a Normandy city table
Yeah,
with
that is always extreme, but it looks so cool, doesn't it?
it does look really cool. It's a really tough tactical challenge because
Yeah,
getting across a street, I mean, there's a lot of cover and then
yeah,
there's not a lot of cover because you
yeah.
got to get from street to street. So that was a fun table. And I think the players did enjoy that. And I had some more open tables like that desert table there. I had one with a train on it that's creates some tricky challenges. My attitude towards tables is this. If if your captain says go take hill 23 or go deal with it, you've got to deal with it. And
You've
so you
got
got
to
to
deal
walk
with
up
it.
and
Yeah,
figure out how to solve it. Um, and so at the beginning of the event, I asked for players to approach it with that attitude that I
yeah,
still got to solve this, no matter
yeah.
how dense or open it was. And I think in general, I didn't get a single complaint on any of the tables, so that the people seemed to really enjoy them. So that was
No,
great.
no. With this type of density, you shouldn't get complaints. This is perfectly in the zone of not too much, not too little for me. And most players would agree with that, I think. So really, really lovely tables. Right.
You know,
Um,
I'm
sorry.
sorry. Go ahead.
No, no, you go.
I was just going to say, the in the U.S. with the population, you got a large population country, but you have often enormous distances.
Yeah,
So in Atlanta, to get from one suburb to another, if someone says how long is your commute, and someone says an hour, people here will say, well, that's not bad.
yeah,
That's very different from a lot of places in Europe. So you have a lot of players that are driving a very long distance or they traveled a long way. I wanted to make sure and we invested a bunch of money and energy. I mean, I probably built 300 tree bases
Yeah.
before this event. I had a whole forestry enterprise going on my kitchen table, but my wife was not happy. But I wanted them.
Sometimes we draw enormous checks on our wives. I mean, it's
God,
really
there's the cost to go to event, and then there's the spouse capital for having gone, right?
spouse capital. Yeah, I call
Yeah,
it
but
wifey points, but it's the
wifey
same deal.
points.
Yeah.
Love it. But I wanted them to be able to go and say and have
Yeah.
this visual thing, so when they walked in the room, they
Yeah.
went, "Wow,
Wow.
this is
Yeah.
really worth it. This was
Yeah.
worth that drive. This was worth it." Cool. And
Yeah.
I think we achieved it. I really
Yeah.
do.
And you had enough space. I also noticed because you wrote the Gamers Bill of Rights, which I think I'm gonna link just in the doobly doo for this video, um, because it's such a fun little document. If that's okay with you, and
There it is.
so so you had the Gamers Bill of Rights, and that is that's how you sort of view your mental approach to tournaments, isn't it? What should be there?
It came out of going to tournaments where, like we said, you're spending spouse capital. It's expensive to travel, and you're away from your family or away from work, whatever, and you're having to
Sure.
pay for travel and hotels, and it can get very expensive. And then you go and then you ride back and you go, wow, it was disorganized, or I was bumping butts with everybody in the
Yeah,
room,
yeah,
and it was hot, or it was too cold,
yeah,
or the worst is where the scoring system was confusing, and you sit around for an hour while they try to figure out who won, and all the things that can go wrong. Now, look, I know it's volunteers. I really have
yeah,
a lot of affection
yeah.
for volunteers that do these, and it's a lot of work. And no one does it for the money. We often lose money on these events, right? But it doesn't
Always,
mean
always.
all those caveats doesn't mean that it has to be poorly run. So
No,
we
no,
wrote this gamer bill of rights, and that's the way Warzone on the 40K side has been run, including some stuff you won't see anyplace else. We feed every player a full lunch. They get a full hot buffet lunch both days, so they don't have
yeah,
to leave and come back late.
yeah.
And we provide table service, so you can order a drink at your table, and a waitress will come by and actually have a picture of
Which, by the
that.
way, is the most amazing thing I've ever heard at an event. That's just so cool. I mean, one thing is you're in a hotel, whatever, and you can go and grab something from the bar, but actually having table service, that's just mind blowing, right?
It,
That's so cool.
it's the best ever, because in the morning you can get a coffee, or you can get a
Yeah,
Coke or a
yeah,
water, or you can get in the
yeah,
afternoon when you're really losing and you need a drink. It's there for you. And what I saw happening over and over again, though, is the player offers to buy the drink for his opponent. And so you end
yes,
up with this camaraderie going on. It's kind of a very social thing.
yeah,
And, and with people coming from such long distances, we had a few people that knew each other, but the vast majority of people had never met the vast majority of people. And so
yeah,
it's not like the clubs that travel in Europe together, where you walk into
yeah.
the room and you end up knowing everybody. It's
That typically happens in Europe. I mean, when we go to events, I know almost like 80% of all people. Yeah, but when you're with a lot of strangers, but you're sharing this like the third object. You're sharing the hobby. Then you just need a little bit of feeling nice and maybe a single beer.
maybe a beer or a scotch if you're really in
Yeah,
trouble.
yeah,
Just that.
yeah.
that.
That's so cool. So I had a question. What was my question? Right. So you think it was success this year? There was nothing that actually you think should be done differently for next time?
Well, so I rewrote the missions,
Yeah.
the missions out of the rule book. So I took the 12 missions in the book and I rewrote them through the lens of what you need at a tournament.
Yeah.
So the victory conditions need to be clear. Can you outflank or not?
Yeah.
How do you deploy spotters? A lot of the questions that people, experienced players are kind of surprised how often intermediate or beginning players are confused by how those missions work. I tried to rewrite them in a format so that as a tournament player, everything was on the page, including like how far from the objective
Yeah.
do I need to be in order to score it, and some things like that. And I think that worked beautifully.
Yeah.
And then I rewrote several of the missions. We played Top Secret in a completely different version. That's not a great term mission, but
No,
it worked.
it's not. Yeah.
It worked as a rewrite. It basically became a essential objective that you could pick up and move, but never more than 6 inches.
Yeah.
And so it created a free for all of the center table. So I rewrote a few of those, and I think I got some feedback on tweaking some language, but in general, I feel like that was a huge push forward. I will post that. Well, the tournament pack is posted, but I'll post it out if anyone wants to see how those missions were written and the format that they were written in, because I think we saw Warlord Games a couple years ago try to rewrite the missions for
Yeah, they
tournament
did.
play,
Yeah. Yeah.
and there was some clumsiness in the way they were written, right?
Yes, but the general idea was good.
Right.
And it was the approach that you have to have someone who goes to tournaments, who knows about competitive play, look at the missions and just say, does this work? Can we make this work?
Right.
And because you don't want, what you don't want is anyone going to a tournament and then thinking that they had no chance in one scenario. That in one mission where you just like, okay, we roll the first dice. I lost the first dice. My opponent got it. That was it. That was the game. That is what you don't want. And I think a rewrite of Top Secret, Demolition, Point Defense, some of these missions that, yeah, is a good idea.
So to that point, Bo, I changed the way prep bombardment works.
Yeah.
So I said it's
Makes
already
sense.
happened, and every player it starts with 2 pins on their model at the very beginning of the game,
Okay.
and now let's play. And so it eliminated the chance that a unit's destroyed. It also eliminated all that time of going through doing the prep bombardment, and it
Yeah.
eliminated that butthurt feeling when one player rolls a 1 and the other player doesn't,
Oh,
right?
you will
And
not believe how often that happens to me in tournaments.
me too, even as a British player, I'm
Yeah.
constantly like, I rolled the 1, right?
Yeah.
But
Last
but
tournament I was at, two of the missions had prep bombardment. I rolled a one in both of them.
yeah. And it's just like, to your point, Bo,
Yeah.
it's not a good feeling. It's not a good feeling to feel like I was significantly, disadvantaged because of some one random die roll that
Yep.
happened early on.
Exactly.
And so I rewrote it that part. Some of the British players probably could have been mad at me about that, but they didn't complain.
Oh
We had
well. No, no, it doesn't matter. The Brits get all kinds of wacky, overpowered stuff anyway.
oh, yes, they do.
I don't mind.
Yes, they do.
I'm
Or I
good
should
with
say,
that
yes, we
little
do.
little change. Yeah. Right. So should we talk about maybe what you saw going into the tournament? What did people bring? What did you see? Because I've already gone over some of the meta for this tournament. What stuck out to you?
So the format, I did this thing, and I got a lot of people calling me going, "Are you crazy for doing this?" But I did 1,000 points,
Yep.
unlimited platoon, no armored company. But you want to bring theater selectors, bring them. Right?
Where,
Play
where
with the
did
toys you
you
got.
where do you put the limit there? Because there are some things that in some tournaments are thought of as being theater, but really they you can like. Do you say that if you're a command vehicle, if that's a vehicle, then you're an armor platoon, or what do you? How do you distinguish?
Yeah, so I had some people ask me questions about ones where it was one of the British lists in Western Desert. It's
Yeah,
um, the Jock column, for
yeah,
example.
yeah.
Would you call that an infantry platoon, or would you call it a tank platoon? Since no tanks are available, yeah, it's a
Yep,
bunch of small vehicles. I would have allowed that in a
yep.
way that I might not have allowed something else. It does put responsibility on the TO
It
when you
does
say
because
theater
you're
selectors
gonna
are
have to
allowed
like make the cut.
to make some judgments. Um, but ironically, it was not an issue. And if you looked at the lists,
I
I'm
did.
sure you looked at those lists and went, "Wow, these are really soft." There's a couple of hard ones, but there's
Some of them were
some really,
soft. A couple were good, but
yeah.
some of them were soft in my meta, and but I'm maybe a bit damaged from what I how I approach the hobby. Um, so yeah,
So I would say that the fear that we were going to see some crazy exploit that really could just
didn't
crush
happen.
the hobby. There was no list here that was any less uh, over the top or more over the top than anything we saw at WTC, right?
True,
And with
definitely true.
much
Yeah, these
much
lists
much
were very sensible.
And the other thing I did is I did a change to the MG rule where the MG does an automatic pen. I know that Toph and the
The
Juggernaut guys
juggers,
can
yeah,
do that in
yeah.
their event. We'd been playtesting it as well, and I let that happen. I did put a cap on a maximum of 3, but everyone was freaking out, and basically, it turned out to be kind of much ado about nothing. If you
Not that
look at
many
the
people brought those, and I'm not sure that they had that much of an effect. It just made them slightly more viable, didn't it?
it made them worth taking.
Yeah.
So there actually were some people that brought an MG team, and the rule's quite fun to play with because it does what you think it would do. It suppresses something, but bringing an MG team is not going to win you a game, right? It's
No,
not a
no, it's not.
right. Overall in the event, if you looked at the order dice count, it was remarkably low.
Yeah, it was.
We had one 20 dice list. We had a
Yeah,
couple of Soviet players that had high count. The 20 dice list was actually a British player.
it was. Yeah,
Um,
which
but
was very strange for me. I did not
it,
see that coming as a British list, but yeah,
it was actually a very, very good list, and he did well in
yeah,
the tournament. Um, he lost one of his final games, which pushed him down in the standings, but it was a closer game than the results showed. So I mean, he was in it up to the tail end, but he was not like blowing people away.
no,
Um, so why such low order count dice list? So when we were talking before about in the U.S., you will often see players because you're local. If you live in, you know, rural North Carolina, rural Georgia, there's
yeah,
nobody to play with, and so the tournament is the place that you can go and get 3 or 5 games. And so you will see people travel that may be a beginner or an intermediate player, and they kind of suck it up and they'll go to an event
yeah,
because they finally get a chance to really play.
yeah,
I would say that half of the field was in that space where they just there was no local meta. The tournament's the closest thing, and it's one of the reasons why I did the bolt action is because of the southeast. There's some tournaments in North Carolina and a couple in Florida, but there was nothing in the Atlanta area, and so we decided to host this to give those players a place where they could conceivably drive and come play.
yeah,
Uh, and in beginning players, you will often see the box set phenomena,
yeah. You will.
and you saw that in some of the lists. You
I
saw
did.
some
Yeah.
people who, I'm sure that there were a bunch of people midnight before still painting the tank, right?
I'm
Right.
sure there were. And you also tend to see with newer intermediate players as well that they bring Germans, that they maybe find one tank that they really like the look of and bring that as well. Um, and those lists maybe at some point they'll figure out what to do and what not to do, and they'll cut down on some of the units that they dislike with time.
It's true. I tried to work with the players when their lists came through. I would give them a call and going, "Are you sure you want to bring a Panther? Are
Yeah,
you sure? Are you sure you
yeah,
don't want to? How about a Steward instead of that,
yeah,
GMC thing that you were going to bring or whatever?" I tried to help them if they identified as a less experienced player to try to build a slightly more competitive list. And sometimes you play the models you own,
yeah,
right? Because I did have a 3 color minimum standard. A paint score was included in your overall score. So, that created some of that too. But I think there were a lot of players. I bet if you did a poll of my group and said, why did you come? I bet over half of them would say they came because it was a chance to play 5 games in 2 days in a way they
yeah,
couldn't get locally. And that's
yeah.
why you saw what you saw.
I guess
Um,
that's right, and we can see that if we just look at the numbers that you have here as well. Um, 2 Panthers in the field and one Panther III. I mean, that is the opposite of what I would have expected at a tournament. Just because the Panther III is way more worth it for the points, but of course there are some people who bought that Panther and they do look damn good.
They look good on
Um,
the table. So both of those players, both German players that brought Panthers, one of them brought it because he wanted a smaller order count dice list so he could finish his games. He knew he was a slower player, a more analytic and thoughtful
Clever.
player, and he wanted to make
Yeah,
sure he finished.
yeah.
And the other one brought it because he was going for best painted, and he actually did end up winning best painted. I'll show you his army
Oh,
in a
that's
second.
awesome. That
It
is awesome.
it
Yeah.
was gorgeous. It was an absolutely beautiful tank, and he
A
had a
real
beautiful army.
centerpiece, isn't it? Yeah, yeah,
Um, the number one tank by far was the Stewart. It was everywhere. It's so everywhere. I'm so bored with it.
yeah. Yep.
But it was everywhere. It's so strong. I would say there were fewer rocket launchers than I thought, and there were fewer flamethrowers than I thought. So
Mm. Yeah,
um,
me as well. The rocket launches, yeah, okay. It depends on where the meta is moving. We're moving away from rocket launches. I sort of feel in the Danish meta at least, um, and also away from flamethrowers. But I did expect there to be more flamethrowers than you actually saw here. Yeah.
if you look at the top performing lists, and that's the order dice count for them. I did this for you. It's
Yep.
interesting that the number one performing list was only 15 order dice.
Yep.
That's still good, but I don't think people are sitting around in the meta going, "Wow, a 15 order dice American list is going to be top table."
Ooh, but I believe so. I mean, for me, 14 to 15, that is where I really want to be with most of my 1,000 point lists. I don't want to be higher than that because then you're bleeding kill points in kill point missions. So 15, 14, yeah, I really like that.
His list is surprising. I've got it teed up here for us to take a look at here in
Yeah,
just a second, but
yeah,
it was surprising. To see a CeeLo Heights list is not a surprise on this. To see
no,
British doing well is not a surprise. That
no,
British Australian list was quite fun. You can see a picture of it there. It was a beautiful army. He'd done this
yeah.
whole jungle-based theme, and it was just absolutely gorgeous with a couple of Stuarts. He did very, very well, and he and the top player ended up playing on the final table. He could have won it overall.
So he could have won it. Yeah,
Yeah, it was with a 14 dice list. He had Gurkhas in it. He had some commandos.
yeah.
He had the two Stuarts, obviously, and an artillery piece. It was a very nice British list. It was really
Yeah.
fun.
And
Um,
he was actually one of the armies that I thought would do very well as well. So I'm guessing my prediction sort of held true for most parts here. Um,
if you had asked him beforehand if he thought he was going to be in the top five, he would have probably laughed at you. He could have won the whole thing had had he won his final games.
yeah,
So you knew more than he did, I would say.
yeah,
There's Ryan's list. Ryan McCallum won the whole thing, and he had the highest battle points. He had the second highest painting. He had several votes for sportsmanship. He is one of those players that seems to excel in all the
star
categories.
players.
He did
Yeah,
beautifully, and his army was so pretty. Was very pretty. Up close, all the eyes were done in insignia and everything. It was a very, very pretty army. But if you actually look at his list,
yeah.
right,
That
it's
was
a
that was a
single
weird
platoon.
one for me. Um, I mean, we have the 15 order dice. It's a single platoon, and that's
Yeah,
the first thing that really boggles my mind. Which means, and by the way, I disagree massively with his choice of tank, but
yeah.
it really means for me that he definitely knows what he's doing. If he wins with this list, he knows what he's doing. Um, you have the lone inexperienced lieutenant. You have two infantry squads of 8 to 9 men with
Actually,
BARs,
that should be
veteran.
three. That should
Uh,
be three. Yeah,
Three.
three.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So three rather large semi-push units that can skirmish, but also you can push veterans, right? 8 to 9 men, you can
Hmm.
push them. A medium mortar with a spotter, flamethrower, regular, sniper, veteran, trucks with two jeeps, all regular. So that is the transport for most of his infantry. If he wants to throw them forward, that's always a nice option to have, but you don't need to have it, right? Not necessarily, because especially as Americans, you can foot slog and skirmish up. The Recce Jeep and then the Hellcat. The Hellcat. I
I
I
know, right?
I don't get that.
Yeah.
That's
Under what circumstances would you not take a Stewart in a list like this? You look at
I
it and
would
go, that.
always, unless I was bringing a Sherman with a howitzer, I would always take a Stuart with this list
Well,
every
there's
single time.
also a chaplain and a medic in this list, the only
Yes,
two in the entire event. So,
yes, and but those I do get because they are buffing out his order dice count.
yeah, they do.
So they're cheap order dice, and he can. I don't know. Did you allow chaplains, medics to take objectives?
I did not allow them to take objectives, but they could score in sectors.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yep.
So what he was doing is he was putting the lieutenant in putting the bazooka in one Jeep and the flamethrower in another. I think I may have not put the bazooka. He had a bazooka team
He had
too.
a bazooka as
But
well. Yeah.
yeah, I typed this
It,
about 5 minutes before this call.
yeah.
So, but he was driving them around, and then when they would get out, he would put one of those small teams back into the Jeep again.
Yeah.
And so it was quite interesting what he was doing with it. So Ryan came in second at WTC.
He did.
And of all the lists that he was on my team last year,
Yeah.
USA Team 2. Of
Yeah.
all the lists that you reviewed, his is one of the lists you did not review. It was a
It
French
was.
list with a
Yeah.
Char 2C.
Yes.
And he had second. He was in, I don't know, maybe been tied for second place. I don't remember how many people had that slot, but he did
We were
exceedingly well.
I think we were 5 people who got the same amount of wins and
Yeah.
draws. Um, and depending on how you score it, because Dan Lane got first place with all wins, although his team
Yeah.
didn't do terribly well. Um, well, they came third. And then Achilles of the Spanish team came second. He had no losses. And then me and Ryan and everyone else came
Yeah.
at the same point score as Achilles, by the way. But we all had one loss and then all wins. Yeah.
Yeah, so what that shows, it didn't surprise me you didn't review the French list, because if you looked at it closely, a lot of people would have gone, I don't get it, right?
Yep.
It shows you here, it's that classic conversation about, is it the list or is it the player?
Exactly.
And you're looking at this even with 3 infantry
And
squads and a
this
bazooka, which I
clearly
should
shows
have
that
on the
it's the
squad.
player.
It shows that it's the player, right? And how encouraging is that? That I know we do a lot of teeth gnashing and flailing around about lists and meta and all the rest of it, and it is important. It's fascinating.
Yep.
It does prove that a strong player can bring a pretty straightforward list, something any beginner could put together, and you
Yep.
can still walk up to a tournament
And do well.
and have a good chance of winning. And I love that about Bolt Action in a
Yep.
way that's not true about 40K.
Yeah. That's way more pay to win, and you have to be on top of the latest codex releases and all of that. That is not true of Bold Action, and uh, we've done reviews before, especially of the last WTC, where this was the conclusion, basically, that it is not about the list; it is about the player. Um, and I'm still with the lists. I'm only at around, if I'm guessing just based on list, which I do for most of the tournaments, I start guessing which lists will do well.
Yeah.
I'm around 60 to 70% correct. But if you know the players, it's around 80 to 90% correct all the time. So it's definitely not. And this, Ryan, is a perfect example of one of these. Yeah. And
Yeah.
then we have the best painted as well.
Yeah, I
Oh,
just thought it.
that's the P dot camo, isn't it?
It is the P. Dot Cam. He did a beautiful job. He did hand painted BMW logos and hand painted
Oh,
unit markings and the license plates and all the stuff. He did just such a gorgeous job with his army. So I thought he certainly deserved that. It brings up actually, so the Australian Jungle Army that I showed you earlier,
yep.
won favorite army,
Okay.
and he won best painted. And this is a pet peeve of mine in tournaments, is that you will have tournament organizers will confuse the two.
Yeah.
Best painted should be actually tactical scores, and the I can stop sharing here.
Yep.
Do that. There you are. Stop sharing. Yeah. But favorite army could be, display base, and it could be clever. It doesn't have to be the best technical
No.
painter to be the one that all the players like.
Yep.
But I think great painters like someone like Sean should get judged by someone who knows how to paint, and they
Yeah.
should be judging them on artistry and skill, and they're both valid prizes, and they should both be done in a tournament. And
Yes.
that's one of the things we wanted to do is, an average player's got some crazy creative idea, they can go for it. And then someone who's just a master with a paintbrush, they deserve an award too.
Yeah, they do. That's so cool. Right. So that was basically what we had on the program. We've talked about how the event went. We've talked about the meta. We talked about the lists. Before you go, John, before we end this, we saw each other at the WTC. Were you surprised coming from the US? coming to Europe about what you've seen so far from the European meta. I know that the WTC is not like completely the European meta, although it's maybe the tip of the spear or what have you.
Yeah.
What do you think so far about the European meta coming from the US? I have to ask because I'm sitting here in Europe and, and trying to figure out everyone else's meta.
So it didn't surprise me at all, but then I looked at what people brought to Poland a few
Yep,
years ago, pre-COVID, right? And so you looked at those lists and you could see people that a lot of the teams, not all, a lot of the teams were being very thoughtful. You saw min-maxing on high-powered units, you saw Stuarts and flamethrowers, and you saw multi-launchers, and you saw the kinds of things that will delete units happening. And the British players, I expected every British player to be, chopped to the gill full of Gurkhas, and that
yep,
exactly happened.
yep,
The problem with that format, when you say, I think a lot of players think that when you say single generic reinforced platoon, that somehow balances the game. And in my opinion, it's exactly the opposite because it allows for some players, like British, for
yep.
example, like the Japanese, like Russians, like Soviets, you can build an incredibly powerful list within that format
You
in a
can.
way that it's very hard for Germans or some of the other lists to do. And you could literally saw that happen.
Yeah,
I really wasn't surprised, and I don't think my team was surprised. I think the other American team was.
I think so
I think
too.
they I think they were caught off guard by
A
it,
little bit,
and
a little bit. Yeah,
but we walked in. Here's another difference between for us. So, I had to get in order to get a team together. I had to get people who wanted to go,
yeah,
who could afford to go,
yeah.
and could get the time off. It was probably $2,500 for us to travel into and back. When traveling all the rest of it. So you end up shrinking your pool of available players. So I was
Quite a lot.
begging
Yeah.
people to come. I actually had your review of the lists. One of the players was someone we had to adopt from Ireland.
Yeah.
Just we had to scrounge some local player up who probably didn't really want to play at WTC, but we had to force him into the team in order to make it happen. And that was the big difference is for a U.S. team to go there. Our best players may not be able to get the time off, or they may not be able to afford to go, and so it makes it, I think, a more challenging thing for us
At,
than
at,
for
at
maybe some of
least
you guys.
at least the especially maybe the time and the cost, because the cost is greater, and you're going to have more time because the distance is greater as well. The cost is still an issue for many people in Europe as well, of course. And going into the next WTC, that is of course one of the things that also influences who goes.
I
However,
tell
it's
you,
yep,
but my team had a great time. We really
yeah,
had a great time. It was so much fun meeting people from all over the world. The majority of our experience with all the teams that we played was great. It was fun meeting all the team captains. You guys are really
yep,
interesting folks, and that's created a network of stuff for me, which has been fun. Yeah, the tables needed some work, and
yeah,
the missions needed a little bit of cleanup. But overall, all of our games went great. And for those guys who put it on and were able to host that for two different game systems simultaneously with all brand new terrain for all those
yeah,
tables, God
yeah,
bless them. I think they did a heroic job
yeah.
of pulling that together in a COVID year. And I'm hoping Spain will take I know they took the criticism to heart, and I think it'll
Good.
be a great event in Spain, don't you?
I think so too. Um, I am at least very hopeful and optimistic about it, and we are going to see a lot of new nations this year at the WTC. I know. So, right. Do
So,
you have any
so
final comments for the viewers before we end off?
So you playing British again for WTC?
I'm not telling.
You're not telling. I haven't decided either. So, um, but
Well, it's fairly probable that at least one of my team will bring a British list. Let's say it's like that.
yeah,
So,
they keep getting stronger and stronger. It's hard to not include them. So,
yeah, it is. Right. John, that was it. Thank you so much for sharing your tournament, and I will link as much as I possibly can for the people viewing at home, both the link for the tournament itself, for the pack, whatever we can get. I'll make sure that it's linked so that people can see. And that
I,
was
I yeah,
yep.
I appreciate your talking to me and both all the content that you produce. I had no idea how prolific a poster you were. And that's really cool that you do that for the hobby. I think we all owe you a huge round of applause for that. So
You know what? I felt like somebody needed to do this. I didn't want it to be me. I was just somebody needs to make all this stuff up about the tournaments. That's what I want for Bolt. Oh, well, yeah.
there you go.
Anyways, thank you so much for participating.
All right, Bo.